Welcome to week 4 of the Foundation Accelerator. And today we're going to talk about the big elephant in the room, which is the pandemic. But we're not going to talk as much about how it's going to affect health as we're going to talk about how it affects hunger, which is not a topic that's been talked about a lot. Here's the reality of today. Here is the global pandemic. This happens to be the board game, which was frustrating enough when it was just a bunch of wooden pieces and a board. It's way more frustrating now with the actual death count. Started tracking this in screenshots a few Tuesdays ago. So Tuesday, March 17th, there were just shy of 200,000 people known to have this virus in the world. 1 week later, Tuesday, March 24th, that number had just a little bit more than doubled to 400,000. 1 week later, it had almost doubled again to 800,000. And I gave a talk back then at the end of March, beginning of April, talking about where does this go? And so back then, this is what the plot looked like. So 200,000, 400,000, 800,000. And what people didn't understand, and a lot of people still don't understand, is how this thing grows. So normally, in most math we work with, right, we're taught math in school, and most of the things we do in the real world are linear. So we see this plot and we just think, okay, it's going to grow kind of in that direction. But what we're missing here is the fact that pandemics grow exponentially. And we don't really come across exponents and exponential math too often in real life. So we think by this projection that it would have been 1 million cases by the 7th, 1,000,002 by the 14th, 1,000,004 or so by the 21st. Here we are, this week. Should be 1,000,000 something cases, but that's wrong. The way it actually grows is like this. And this is a curve that matches those first 3 weeks. And so if that curve had continued unfettered, if we weren't all locked up right now, we would have seen multiple millions of cases by now. If you haven't seen this video, there's a YouTuber who normally teaches math, right? His videos are about visualizing mathematics. It's called 3 Blue 1 Brown, and the link is up there in the corner. Way back in March, he did this video just to show how exponential math works and trying to build up an intuition on how that goes. And then he followed it up about 2 or 3 weeks later with this video, which is even more important, because this video was a set of models for not only how the epidemic grows, but how we can knock it back down by doing things like social distancing. And he shows in 23 minutes all these different scenarios and which ones work and which ones don't. All right, back to the numbers. So if we just take those 3 data points we had, 200, 400, 800,000, and just use round numbers, you can see it's growing 2x. And so if we just take that 2x growth rate and just project it forward into the future, we would have had 12 million cases this week, right? Or somewhere between 6 and 12 million cases this week. And it would just keep growing until more than half of the population was sick, and then it would slow down. Right? It's never actually an exponential forever. It's always an S curve, but it takes a while until you get to the top of the curve unless you do something about it. So we talked about slowing the curve over a month ago. Most of us have been locked up for over a month. And if we just take a swag at what that could have meant, right? And again, these were the numbers from weeks ago when I first did this talk. So if we could slow that down from 2x to 1.5, and then 1.4 the next week, and 1.3 the next week, and 1.2, and so forth, then these are the numbers that pop out. So it says by this week, we'd be between 2.2 and 2.6 million. Well, here's what happened. Here's what actually happened. We did 1.4 million the week after that. So it did slow a bit. And then 1.9 as of Tuesday this week. And so when we plug in those numbers into that same chart, we can see, well, we didn't quite get that 1.5 that we were projecting. We got it down to 1.75, but it doesn't slow down a whole lot more the next week. So this slowing of the curve is in fact happening. And now we can take another swag and say, well, where's it going to be at the beginning of May or the end of April? And so it's going to be between 2 and 3 million at that point. And it's still going to grow, right? We're still growing faster than 1. And in epidemic terms, if you're growing faster than 1, and you're still growing exponentially, it grows really fast, right? So you can just see there, just look at those last 2 figures. If this comes true, that'll be 400,000 cases between April 28th and May 5th. And, people weren't even taking this seriously back in March 24th when it was 400,000 cases in total, right, globally. But it's going to get worse, right? So that's just the primer, just to get you warmed up into what this exponential math means, because there's a few places in the world where this has barely gotten started. One of them is India. So here's a chart of actual known cases in India. And again, the top number is way back in March 21st anyway, but you can see they're following their own exponential curve. I don't know what the actual count is today. And in fact, nobody knows what the actual count is today, right? There was this great article written up. All the URLs for all the articles are there on the screen. There was a great article by Mr. Roy who's talking about how this is going to affect India and how they should deal with this. But I'm actually going to focus more of the rest of the talk on Africa. And I'm going to do that for a few reasons. One is it's usually the forgotten place in the world. And two, as you saw on the map, a lot of the work that Fledge does is in Africa. We have 8 companies right now that we're working with in Africa, and we have about 30 graduates that are there that we've worked with in the past. So here's the map of Africa that I found online talking about most prepared and least prepared countries. And what is incredibly ironic about this map is that the US and the UK are listed as incredibly well-prepared countries. And yet we're having a massive pandemic in both of those countries, right? And the Netherlands is doing just as poorly. Whereas China was listed as not so prepared, but their pandemic is pretty much over by now. Meanwhile, we have these countries down in Africa, right, 54 countries, and they do not have the healthcare system set up for good years, let alone years with viruses like this. So let's pull up some stats just to show you what that's like, right? And I'll get to the hunger part in a minute here. But just in terms of how much healthcare is there. So here's on the left a graph of a select number of major African countries, right? The biggest economy in Africa right now is Nigeria, followed by I think it's Ethiopia, and then Kenya. And then South Africa, I think, is down that far. We'll take South Africa out because they're halfway developed compared to these other countries. These are much less developed countries. So you can see, right, they have almost no doctors compared to South Korea. That's the blue line. And South Korea has half as many doctors as Italy. Italy's not doing as well as South Korea in this pandemic. Maybe doctors isn't the right measure. Maybe it's health expenditure per GDP, and you can see that the African countries are not doing terribly when it comes to that. They just don't have a very large GDP. More importantly is how fast these epidemics are growing. And so again, on the left, we're seeing exponential curves. And you can look at Tanzania and go, okay, maybe they're early, maybe they're doing well. Reality is they're just not testing. On the right side, we have cases per 1,000 people. So we can see the curves kind of go down a little bit on some of the countries here because the populations are big, right? Nigeria is a 200 million person country, but Ghana is doing terribly in terms of having an outbreak in their country. For those of you who don't know, like when we talk about Africa, we're not talking about a few 100 million people. We're talking about 1.2 billion people, almost the same population as China and India. Right? 3 times the population of the United States, almost 4 times the population of the United States. It's a huge place. It is the last place on earth where you can find a billion poor people.